Hey, writers, we have a super exciting topic of conversation for you here today, and I'm really looking forward to digging in. But first, let me introduce you to Gabrielle K. Byrne. She has been writing speculative fiction in the Pacific Northwest for more than 15 years. She has two fantasy books for middle grade readers out with Macmillan. Rise of the Dragon Moon was a Junior Library Guild selection, and the Kirkus Review for her second book, called The Edge of Strange Hollow, called the story spookily thrilling with superlative world building. She's helped all kinds of writers, published and unpublished, improve their stories, including working as a mentor for the now retired Pitch Wars program. If you're familiar with that, writers, that was a big to do for a very long time. And she has a master's degree in literature and a second bachelor's in environmental studies. And now she's an Author Accelerator certified book coach in the fantasy and romance space for all age groups. So, welcome, Gabby.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a super interesting conversation, maybe a little nerdy. I don't know. Let's see.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. And writers, the reason why I say this is because you heard me talk about Gabby's interest in writing in the fantasy space, but she also has this study in environmental studies, which is going to be how we're going to talk about world building today, because Gabby has this really interesting perspective on using what she knows about science and the world with environment to help us with creating other worlds or even just world
Different
building, I'm
places.
guessing, for realistic worlds. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yep, I
right.
am always excited to mash up science with other things. I am
Same.
here for it. So, but maybe before we get too deep into it, maybe we could just talk generally about world building. I hesitate to throw out terms that, I'm sure we have writers of all experience levels here, and I don't want to leave anybody behind. So, in
Right.
the general sense of world building, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so world building, sort of simply put, is creating the richest setting you can in relationship with your characters, right? So, sort of some general rules of thumb, whether you're writing an epic fantasy or a contemporary romance, is that you want to know more about your world than you actually share. So often writers are told that world building is kind of like an iceberg where the reader sees the tip of the iceberg above the water, but the author knows all this other stuff about that setting. And that just helps create a richer tone. It gives you the opportunity to really leverage sensory opportunities, the scent of pancakes coming from the cafe, or the feeling of bark against your hand as you're passing through a particular forest, or you know um, there's all kinds of rich details that can be added, but you want to add them when you need them, which is when your characters come across them or need to know what it is about this world that impacts them. So in a very simple sense, it's making the world your characters are living in.
Yeah, yeah. And this is what's going to help our readers dig into the story a little bit more, feel like they're a part of it and not,
Right,
yeah,
right.
more immersive. Okay, so now I also want to make sure we cover exactly what do we mean when we're talking environmental studies? What all gets included in that environmental science? Even that, I'm maybe interchanging two terms that I shouldn't be. Environmental studies, environmental science, are they the same, more or less? Give me the
Yeah,
rundown on that.
right. So they are subtly different. Environmental science is really using science to study very particular things about an environment, right? And environmental studies is a little bit broader, and it's about observation, really, and trying to understand the relationship between things and humans in particular, right? We function as a part of any given environment, and we're in relationship with it, and there's a push and a pull there, and a give and a take, right? There's things that we need to survive and move through the world, and that impacts the things that are around us, and that we're using as resources. And so it's that theory that I like to use when I'm working on a world. And again, that could be an epic fantasy, or it could be the cafe down the street. There's always relationship. And I think that's where that overlay happens, because world building is all about relationship, and environmental studies, the the observations of our world and our relationships to the things in our world and objects and beings are both integral to those two things.
Yep. Very cool. Okay, so why is this going to be helpful for us? How are
Mm-hmm.
we going to take what we know about this very scientific kind of field mindset and
Yeah.
help us to create, you know, a world that no one has ever seen before?
Right, right. Yeah, so this works really well in fantasy. Fantasy worlds tend to be a little bit more elaborate, and particularly as you get up in your age, in your readers' ages, right? Like the adult fantasies are much more complex. And so what I like to do is pick a place to start. Pick a landscape, say, or even you can pick an animal to start with. That can be a lot of fun, especially if you know there are going to be animal human interactions in your story at some point, right? And start asking questions because environmental studies and observing your world is all about question and answer. So, for example, if I wanted to have a predator, if I knew there was going to be a predatory interaction in my story, I could start with a predator and say, okay, where does this predator live? It lives in it lives in a savanna, right? It's a grassy savanna. Okay, what season is it? It's summer. It's really hot out. Okay. Um, what does this predator eat? It eats mammals. It eats other rodents. How does it get them? It digs them out. Okay, so you have two things, right? You have your predator and you have its prey. You have this burrowing prey animal. And you go through a series of questions that get very, very detailed about each of these animals. And then when you've sort of gone through a long list of questions, well, how does it stay cool? Where does it get its water? Are there things that can frighten it or hurt it in some way? Um, what is its relationship to people, right? When does it come across people? Does it migrate? Does it go through different landscapes at different times of year? And would it run into people maybe in the winter, by the river? or do people hunt it because that's the only large source of food? Is it something that hunts people? Right. So you go through sort of these questions, and each question can lead you to a whole other landscape or to a series of other animals. How does it stay warm, stay cool, stay camouflaged if it's a prey animal? Um, how would people then hunt it if it were camouflaged? Or what
Mm.
adaptations has it come across or evolved to use in some way? When I was doing Dragon Moon, when I was writing Dragon Moon, I needed a prey species for the dragons. And so it's an icy world. And so I made bison. Well, bison eat a lot. They're huge, right? Like
Yeah.
I needed something big to feed the dragons, but then I needed something to feed the bison.
Yeah.
So what I did was I created an algae that lives in the ice, and it's super potent, very nutritious algae, bitter, so people don't like to eat it, but the bison can dig it out. They had special teeth,
Hmm.
special tusks that they could use to dig the algae from the ice. And so, just trying to figure that relationship out between people and the predator that hunts people, but also what do they normally eat? They eat these bison, but what do the bison eat? The bison were camouflaged to match the ice because the people also hunted the bison. So just, it's sort of this web of questions that you
Yep.
ask in relation to what we know about nature. And if you are struggling to sort of get started with this process, you can always start with an animal that you know well, right? A cat, a dog, a squirrel, a snake, whatever. Like kind of practice with an animal you already know, And that starts to give you a sense of how this process works. And you can go in many different directions. You can start with a landscape, or you can start with an animal. You can go very, very into detail about each thing, or you can kind of skim the surface and focus on the animals you know are going to be integral to your story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose too, you could also play around with like how much your characters know. Like, are they discovering things about
Right.
the world or the creatures or anything around them, or is it just stuff that there's all things about the worlds that we live in that we just kind of take for granted. The sun rises, the
Uh,
sun sets. Like these are things
exactly.
that we
Yeah.
know, but if we were
Hmm.
new to a world, we might not know them. So sometimes a story can be about uncovering information, and sometimes the information can be there to bring something to life a little better
And
for
it
the
can
reader.
really inform your plot too,
Yeah.
right? Because if you have two seasons instead of four, or if you only have one season, or if your creature is nocturnal
Hmm.
and is only going to come across your characters at night, that tells you, well, I need a scene at night, right? If I want this
Yeah.
to happen.
Yep.
And so that can also lead to all kinds of other scenes that can inform sort of the progress through the character arc and what helps this character, what are they afraid of? Are they afraid of maybe they're afraid of the dark, or maybe that means they have to pass through some area that they really didn't want to.
Yep.
I also like to ask, once I have sort of some of the basics laid out, I really like to think about human spirituality, because I
Hmm.
think that informs, because our relationships with the natural world are so informative to our spiritual beliefs and always have been as humans. And so, what does that look like in this story, right? How long has there been a relationship between humans and this predator? And 10,000 years ago, when there were ancestors for our current characters, what did they think about this predator? What did they do to avoid it? What did they do? How did they feel about it? Were they afraid of it, in awe of it, grateful for it? There are all sorts of sort of really deep emotional universal sorts of human feelings that can be leveraged in our stories
Hmm.
because of a historical relationship with a landscape, or with a creature, or a resource of some kind. Like all of those things, I think often about N.K. Jemison's The City We Became, right? Which is
Hmm.
a story in which the city is a character in the story. It's very much alive and participating in the progression of the story. And I think that treating our worlds in that way, always like as if they were characters in our story, can be a really, really rich experience, and can just make a story sing in a lot of ways that can be unexpected even to the author.
Huh. Okay, so you obviously come from this more experienced background of looking at the world differently than someone
Mhm.
who does not have quite the training that you would have had. Do you have some tips for writers who are maybe not as scientifically minded, but who still like the idea of this kind of approach? Is there like a more basic way to maybe
Absolutely.
dip your
Yeah.
toes in the water?
Yeah, there's a couple things I think that are really helpful. One is, I mentioned starting with animals that we know, or a favorite flower or something. Just thinking about, and maybe making a little bulleted list about, what do I think this, and it doesn't have to be right, is the nice thing, right? You can just make it all up, even if it's a real flower or a real
Yeah.
animal. But the point is, like if this badger were gonna have you ever seen the memes with the children kind of carrying possums in their arms like this, and the possum is all scary, and their jaws are open and they're hissing, they make this terrible sound, right? So I think, if I were going to bring home a possum carried in the crook of my elbow, right? What would I need to know? right? I would need to know, A, is it going to bite me? Right? And if it does, what do I do? What does it want to eat and drink? Is it going to poop on my floor? Is it going to eat my cat? Is it going to be hot, cold? How would I make this possum feel at home, right?
Yeah.
And feel safe? What is it maybe scared of? What is it? Does it not like loud noises? And I'd start to just sort of make a list of, what I know about possums. And that can be a really informative way to begin a story. What do I know about this mountain area? I
Hmm.
know it's really beautiful. I know there's a stream. I
Hmm.
know, the sun is shining. I know there are these really dark purple flowers, and it's just sort of making a list of everything I want to know about that place. And then you can take each of those things and talk a little bit more about, right? What do I know
Yeah.
about these purple flowers? Are they there all the time? Can I eat them? Do they smell good? Are they toxic? Like if I touch them, am I going to get poison ivy sort of feelings? Like what, you know, um, what do I think I know about this? And you can make it up, which is part of the fun, of course, of building a world.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be right. And the other thing that I think can be helpful is just to start keeping a little journal and making observations in it. This is what the Victorians did. It was the beginning of sort of environmental studies as a civic interest.
Hmm.
And it led into sort of the volunteerism movement later on. But keeping a little nature journal where you sort of say, oh, it's fall. The leaves are turning brown. They're falling off the trees. There's a smell in the air that I can smell. Oh, also there seems to be like this penchant for pumpkin lattes in the fall. Like, what's that about? Like, why is that because we are, is there a pumpkin god that we all must appease with our purchase of pumpkin? I mean, maybe, right? Like, so you can
Yeah.
just sort of, it doesn't have to be accurate, but the point is that you're thinking about relationship.
Hmm.
You're thinking about, like, what are you seeing and what does it mean?
Yeah.
And just that practice, I think, can really generate a lot of depth in your world building efforts.
Well, I can tell you, if you ever see me carrying a possum in the crook of my arm, I'll tell you what that means. It means someone will have to contact the authorities because surely I've been cloned and
It's terribly wrong.
something is terribly, terribly wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's funny you picked like the one animal that I'm always like, oh.
Yeah, yeah, they're scary, and I mean, they're not. They're wonderful creatures. We have one living under our bathtub, and it's lived there for several years, and it gets to stay because it's such a great creature that eats mice and rats and
Yeah,
beetles. And
yeah.
anyway, not to get off on a possum tangent, but I mean, those are the things that we interact with in our world, and they
Hmm.
are like, I don't, even though I love marine biology, I really am afraid of sharks and like crocodiles and any kind of underwater predator. I really gets
Hmm.
my hair up on end. Um, and that's something that I'm not alone in, right?
Right.
Right. So when I'm thinking about, well, what frightens me about them? You can even go down into that level. Like, what is it about them that's scary? Well, okay,
Hmm.
they eat people occasionally, right? That is scary. But also I think they're just their ability to keep their eyes open in the water,
Yeah.
right? The way that they move, their
They're kind of
speed.
hidden from
They're
us.
hidden, yeah, right. Like,
Yeah.
so there's certain things that we can think about ourselves and our as we move through the world, the things that frighten us, that we can get kind of detailed with and share into our worlds that we're building. So there doesn't have to be a shark in your story, but it can be an animal that moves very quickly and
Hmm.
stealthily, right? Or that has eyes that don't close, or that, has unknown appendages, even like things we
Right.
don't know about them. Like, that can be very scary. And it doesn't have to, obviously, this doesn't just apply to predators, it can also apply to pets or to, like we talked about, an entire landscape, really.
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
Um, so,
Oh,
and you don't have to use it all.
right. You won't be able to use it all. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're writing some kind of encyclopedia for a world that you're writing or something. But
Yeah.
when it
Right.
comes
A
to
field guide.
fiction, yeah,
Yeah.
when it comes to
Yeah.
the fiction, you're going to have to select. But no, it's all fascinating. Okay. So, how can our writers connect with you? How do we find you
Yeah.
online?
Yeah. Yes. So my website is gkbyrne.books.com. So it's GKBYRNE books.com. And right now, if folks want to sign up for my mailing list, I actually have a little world building exercise using nature, like we've been talking about, that I'll send to them if they sign up to get my occasional emails. And I hope that I'll get to do some more book coaching really soon too, which will be a great opportunity.
Yeah, well, goodness knows you have the experience between writing your own books, but then also pitch wars,
Yeah,
that's very
yeah,
time intensive undertaking as well. And
yeah, that was an
usually,
amazing experience.
yeah, yeah. So congratulations on doing all of that. That is
Thank you.
awesome. So, okay, we'll have links to all the things, writers, so that you can find Gabby and all the cool stuff she's doing. And just to go back, what kind of writers do you usually work with?
Oh yeah. I'm working with folks who are writing fantasy for any age group. I'm also, happy to work with romance writers, especially rom-com or kind of cozy romance. I've done some work with mystery. So, if you're working on a story, do feel free to reach out to me. And I've got a great sort of intro form that I'll have you fill out that will share a little bit about your project with me, and we'll go from there. But I've got lots of different kinds of packages for folks, and excited to work with people.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Gabby, I just want to thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and your really interesting take on all of this. I
Oh,
always think
thanks,
it's
Sarah.
cool when we can take our fields that people think are not so writing related and yet they become very writing related. And I just love that so much. So thank you.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right, writers, thanks for joining us. We will catch you next time. Bye.